From Wakefield, it's the Nolan Night Show, inviting you to join Nolan and discuss this week Emily Volz the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Nolan.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the show. I hope you enjoyed the last weeks of episodes, because I certainly haven't. If I don't, then I don't know why you're here tuning into this week's. Although we have a very amazing guest, which I'll get to momentarily. Of course, as the regular preamble is, like, comment, subscribe, all that fun jazz to keep the algorithm going, because they say to say that in order to be successful. Follow on social media, Nolan Carr at Night on Twitter, and Nolan Carr at Night Show on Instagram for all news and updates regarding the show. But besides that, that's not the important stuff. The important stuff this week is my guest, and my guest this week she is important to not just the success of Southern New England news, but NBC 10 and so many other things. Originally hailing from the land of the boss, my guest this week has spent the last decade plus leading the charge, not just as a member of the premier news station in Rhode Island, but also presenting journalism in the way it's supposed to be told. Whether she's winning heavy gold awards or helping out our community's consumers, Emily Volz is what it's all about when it comes to talking about journalism. Ms. Volz, it's a pleasure to speak to you today.
Thank you so much. I feel like you hyped me up more than anyone ever has. I appreciate that.
I want to start like this. I've spoken, as I just said, to a lot of people who you work with closely in NBC 10, but also others in your arena of broadcast journalism, with a field over the last few years that really was, I want to say, topsy-turvy or thrown on top of its head the last few years with everything that went on. So for you and all that you've experienced, and now the last chunk of time where things are sort of regular again, what's it been like for you to be able to be in studio and to cover stuff as it once was before 2019, 2020?
It's interesting. So for me personally, I mean, like, obviously the pandemic was just like such a huge news story, and it changed the way all of us did news in the industry. We saw so many people broadcasting for home. But so simultaneously, I was also pregnant with my first child. I was 6 months pregnant when the pandemic started. So, I mean, when you combine that with like so many huge changes in my personal life during the time of the pandemic, and then, seeing what's happened in the news industry too, it's just like your whole world is different now as we get back into the regular sense of normalcy. I mean, when the pandemic started in March of 2020, I know, like, there was that 1 week at work where everyone was scrambling. We were blowing out newscasts. It was all of a sudden coronavirus all the time. And we're trying to do Facebook Lives in between shows with whatever guests we could have. And then at the end of the week, my boss came up to me and he said, I don't know how you're feeling, but we can figure something out. We don't want you to be in a position where you feel like you are putting your health or your baby's health in danger. So they pretty much, at the end of that first week said, we're not kicking you out, but it's probably best if you go home. So they, set it up so I could go live. It wasn't a big setup. It was just being able to go live from my phone. And we had a little app, and then I found like whatever bright lights I could find in my house to make it look like I was lit somewhat normally. And I just was in my living room broadcasting up until the time I gave birth. I had a little microphone, but that was about it. And, I remember leaving and being like, oh, I'll probably be back to work in 2 weeks. Oh, maybe I'll be back in a month. And then all of a sudden it's my due date. And, that was that. I didn't come back until after my maternity leave. And then, coming back after my maternity leave, there was just all these new protocols in place. And even like the format of some of our shows had changed. Our 7 o'clock news, up until the pandemic had been a countdown, your top 7 stories. And then the pandemic changed that, because the top stories of the day were just all pandemic. So there was no reason to have a countdown. It was just whatever the pandemic news was of the day. And it's nice now to have gotten back to a more normal rundown of like what we're covering. It's nice to get back into that grind, but there are some carryovers still, I guess, that have changed. One of the nice things, though, I will say, we're talking to each other via Zoom. I shoot, we do a we launched a 4 o'clock newscast last year, and I do like a consumer block every day with news you can use. And I try to put together a different story with a different, consumery type expert every day. And a lot of times they're based in Boston, they're based in New York, DC, somewhere like that. So I wasn't doing really, occasionally we would do a Skype interview before the pandemic, but yesterday I shot 2 interviews within 30 minutes and then can write stories from my desk. So it has been useful in that sense that I think for journalists and the audience, we've become a lot more comfortable with consuming an interview that's like this, what you and I are doing. It's not distracting anymore to be like, oh, why weren't they able to go to that person's house and shoot the interview? They just assume that's the person on the other end has something else going on, whatever. It's easier to do it via Zoom, and the audience that will consume Zoom interviews now. So that makes our life easier in a sense. We're able to get more content that way. So I think that's one of the big, I guess, not that there were many blessings from the pandemic, but there were some ways in which we reorganized our lives that, make more sense now. And I'm sure, there's a lot of people at home who have a hybrid schedule now that they're like, oh, thank goodness, this is way better than going into the office every single day. So, there are little, I don't know, little silver linings, I guess.
Well, I would hope that having a child and expanding your family would be a silver lining and a different perspective during this whole time. And it gives us all hopefully get time to reflect and learn things about ourselves. Some didn't, some chose not to, but it's the beauty of I guess being different and unique from everyone else. I want to start like this. Obviously, you have great success with what you do as a broadcaster and journalist. And at some point, whatever the field is, and I gather this from everyone from the fields I've had on, at some point or have some idea that, hey, I enjoy what I do and I'm somewhat decent at it. And I know Maura Hirschgord at one of the competing stations, or used to be competing stations at WPRA 12, has shared stories in the past of recanting the sports games, where it is to his grandfather who could not see and that sort of stuff. I'm curious for you, growing up in Jersey, the Garden State, where and when did you realize that you had not necessarily maybe a journalism love or bug, but to share stories and to tell people stuff that they need to know?
So I wasn't one of those people that always knew that I wanted to be a journalist. I, thought when I went off to college, I was a history major and I had every intention of going to law school. I kind of just always assumed I was going to be a lawyer. And when I was in college, I took freshman year, they had it was like a pre-law class that you could take just to get a sense of it. And everyone on the UConn law campus was absolutely miserable. And they were like, do not do this. Do not do this. And they scared me off. So so my second semester, I was like, do I really want to do this? And then I started reassessing, what do I want to do? Am I even passionate about being a lawyer? Do I want to do something else? And one of my best friends, she was a journalism major, and we would hang out every night, do our homework together. And I remember looking through one of her textbooks about journalism, and I was like, this seems cool. And, looking back, I feel like, and I even had this conversation with my mother, I remember in college, because we were trying to figure out what my major would be. And in retrospect, I feel like it makes sense. When me and my sister and my childhood best friend, when we were kids, we would play 2020 growing up. And I would always insist on being Barbara Walters. Yeah. That should have been no child plays that game. That's not a game. And, when I was a kid, I went to Catholic school K-8, and I was always the child lector in church that would go up there and do the readings, every fourth weekend or something like that. And I didn't mind public speaking at all. So I think, in talking to my mom, she was like, yeah, I feel like this kind of makes sense for you. So I started working at the Daily Campus, which was the newspaper for UConn. And I forget what they paid you. It was like $10 a story or something like that. And interestingly enough, my first story was, it's still timely today. It was the woman who was the catalyst for Roe versus Wade. She was speaking at UConn, and I got to cover her speaking engagement. So I was like, this is pretty cool, like to go cover newsmakers. And, I remember I got a chance to talk to a congressman and like do all of this stuff that you feel like as a college student, you're like, wow, this is pretty cool. And then I started doing internships. I interned at Channel 8 in New Haven. And then I interned at CBS 3 Springfield, which no longer exists. It combined together with ABC 40, which I ended up working at a couple of years ago. So, following other reporters out on the story and getting to see it. And just like once, I feel like you go two ways when you're an intern. You get to go out and experience it. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like, this was the most exciting day. Or you're like, I don't know how they turn a story every single day. Like, all of these deadlines are exhausting. And for me, it was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. So it was like a gradual process. I don't think there was one light bulb moment when I was like, oh, I should be doing this. But it was a gradual process, and I'm happy with the decision I've made so far, most days.
Well, I hope so, or else you spend a lot of time in a field that you shouldn't be in a sink or swim scenario, especially in the field of broadcast journalism. After college, after internships, which you had a couple that you were a part of, you got a job, your first job up in the Pocono Mountains at Blue Ridge Communications, and in some may say it's a huge market, some may say it's an even bigger market than another one, but it was a small market that you got started in a small station in the middle of nowhere. How do you choose something like that? Is it a move just that, oh, it's my first option in terms of starting, or is it something where it just led to that?
Oh no. So I mean, the industry has changed a lot. This was 2010 when I graduated college. So it's changed a lot in the last 13 years. I mean, it's still competitive to get your first job right out of college. But I remember, oh my gosh, I probably sent close to 100 tapes, resumes, whether it's a YouTube link or a DVD, like depending on what they wanted back then. And I got a few callbacks for phone interviews. Occasionally they would have me come out to do the interview. I got close a couple of times, but I started applying, I think in April for jobs. I graduated in May. And then it got to the point where I think it was September or October, and I'm like, it's still crickets. And I'm applying to become a substitute teacher in New Jersey. And I'm like, I don't know if this is for me. Like, no one wants me. So this can't be for me. And I just ended up hearing about a small cable station in Lehighton, Pennsylvania, Blue Ridge Communications. And I just made up a lie. I said, hey, I'm going to be in town visiting my aunt who lived 2 hours away. And I did end up visiting her for the interview. But I was like, I would love to stop by and drop off my resume and meet you. And, they were like, yeah, sure. Why not? They had no opening posted, but so I made the drive up there, and I was living in New Jersey at the time. So it was like, a little over 2 hours. It wasn't a huge drive. But while they're giving me a tour of the news station, I give them my demo reel. They say, well, your timing is really good because we just found out this week that one of our reporters is leaving.
Well, there you go.
So, guess who was first in line for the job? The person that drove up there for no reason. It ended up being a very good thing. And, it was a great first station to start at. I mean, also because I was only 2 hours from my parents. So, when the fridge was getting empty, I could make a 2-hour drive home and steal their stuff and beg to my parents for money. And it wasn't, too much of a drive. But they were it wasn't set up like an affiliate station. So there were fewer newscasts. There was less of an online presence. So it was less cutthroat in a sense. You could go to a county commissioner's meeting and then turn the story the next day because no one's covering the Carbon County Commissioner's meeting. There's no rush. You can
I heard that they get pretty rowdy at those commissioner meetings.
so you could take your time, and like they were also so good about the anchors who were there had been there for decades, and they would sit down with you, you'd go into their office and they'd go over every story and ask you questions, and why do you want to put this bite in, why are you telling the story like this, so you get a real sense for how you should be telling a story. So it was really good for learning. They also gave me just like a ton of opportunities that you wouldn't expect. Like they sent me to Washington, D.C. to cover, oh gosh, I can't even remember what it was. It was like, there was like this local Republican group that was marching in Washington, D.C. So they put me on the bus with them and we got to go down to D.C. and it was during the Cherry Blossom Festival and it was beautiful. I got to cover Barack Obama speaking. I didn't get anywhere close to him, but you got all of these amazing first experiences. And like when you talk about like that light bulb moment that you're like, okay, like maybe I might like be good at this, maybe that might be a career. I remember I was covering an arraignment. A guy had been arrested, accused of like beating the crap out of his friends, and the drug charges. It was just a mess, and they're bringing him into the courtroom, or bringing him out of the courtroom rather. And I just ran up to him with a mic, and in asking him about it, I basically got him to confess. So that was like a great story to have. And then the police were like, by the way, can we have that after it airs so we can use it to put this guy away. So then you're like, wow, like my questioning got him to confess on air. Like that was like pretty sweet. So like maybe there's something here. So it was just like I have very fond memories of it. I didn't, I also have memories of like, as you I'm sure heard, the horror stories in journalism. I didn't make much money at all, and had my heat set at 50 in the winter with like an electric blanket over me, and 6 layers of clothes. But the people there were so nice, and they genuinely wanted to help you learn. So I was so happy to be able to start my career there.
Well, that also makes a difference, when you're having to make those sacrifices early in your career, working a lot of holidays, waking up at 2 a.m. to be there for a morning broadcast. It makes the difference. You talked about, of course, the success to non-success of submitting applications and resumes and cover reels for jobs. But once you got your job in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania, eventually, of course, you have some sort of idea of, okay, I've done my time here. I want to move on to something bigger, something better, something much more, I don't want to say tougher, but more of a challenge. At what point professionally did you realize that, okay, I'm sort of reaching my limit here. I want to go to the next level, to either Springfield, and then compare that to then Springfield to Providence with NBC 10?
Yeah, I think early in your career, if you decide that you want to get into this broadcast journalism industry, I think, many of us adopt this kind of like contract mindset because, when you go in, you're under my first job was a 2-year deal. So then when you're like 6 months out from your contract being up, you're like, okay, time to start looking, time to start putting the resume tape out. And I really enjoyed my time in Springfield when I was an intern there. My now husband at the time, but we were just dating then. He had a job lined up at Yale University. And my friends were still in the Connecticut area. I had gone to the University of Connecticut, so Springfield's right there. So I was like, I kind of just want to get back to Springfield. It was kind of like a messy transition back. I had gotten a job at CBS 3 Springfield again, which no longer exists. I had gotten an offer, and when I said, the offer that they had given me in the contract was like $1,000 more than I was making in the Poconos, and I was like, hey, is there any way I could get a little bit more money? This won't even cover my buyout, because I was still under contract for like 2 to 3 more months. And my employers in the Poconos knew I was leaving. They knew I was going to be buying myself out of my contract. But they were up in arms after I said that. And I don't know whether it was because I asked for more money and they were looking for an out, or they were genuinely felt like I had misled them by being under contract, which I hadn't. I had to disclose this to the news director. they withdrew the job offer. So then I had to go back to my old employer and say, hey, remember how I told you I was giving you my 2 weeks? I actually need to stay. And again, they like, this is why I'm so grateful to my first employer, because they were like, all right, no problem, we haven't posted the job is still yours. And a couple weeks later, the ABC affiliate in Springfield posted a job for a weekend anchor, not a reporter. And I wasn't really an anchor, but I applied anyway, and I ended up getting it, and it was a job for more money. So it was like one of those things where you were like, okay, I guess everything works out. You know, when things seem catastrophic and you have to go to your old employer and beg for your job back, you're like, how can this be my life? But it ended up working out in the end. And then I stayed in Springfield at WGGB for 3 years. And then in 2015, I came here to Providence.
Well, I wanna ask you about that. Of course, it's one thing to go from a small market to then a larger size one in Springfield, but then to come to Rhode Island at MC10 with sort of the Supreme Court of legacy reporters with Barbara Morris, you got Patrice Wood at the time, Frank Coletta, Gene Valcente, Frank Carpano, RJ Heim, all these people who have been there for 10 years, 15, 20, 30, maybe even 40 years. As someone who at the time, had put their time in as a reporter, still new compared to them, how intimidating was that once you got the job at MC10 and now you're working closely with all these people who've been there for so long?
I know. So I was really unfamiliar with Rhode Island when I applied for the job here. And my co-anchor in Springfield, because he was older and he had worked at Channel 12 for a number of years. And when I told him I had the interview, he was like, oh my God, like they're like the news leader. And he's like, he's like pulling up the pictures of Patrice and all of them. And he was like, these people have been here forever. So then I get to the interview and I'm like, okay, I'm like nervous now. And this was the first interview that I did where I had to do, I came for the interview and they were like, okay, come back. I don't know, it was a week or something. And we're going to do like an on-camera test, which I had never done before. So they had Dan and I like doing a fake newscast together while they recorded to determine if I was good enough to be hired. And that was absolutely nerve-wracking because you're like, oh my gosh, like it's one thing to put together a demo reel with your best shots. It's another thing to have like the camera turned on you and be like, okay, do I have it? Or I don't know. So that was very intimidating, but you know what? It's like, Dan, I know you've spoken to him before. He's such a goofball, and he like hugged me that day. And I'm not a hugger, and I'm like, what? But he's very good about like disarming people and making you feel more comfortable. So I will give credit to Dan. Like I was very nervous that day, and he definitely helped in making me feel more relaxed. But then like once I had the job, so I think I was still a few months out from my contract being up when I accepted I think I had like 2 months between when I accepted the job and when I started the job so I could finish up my contract in Springfield. And that's like when the nerves really started to kick in, because I started streaming the broadcasts because I worked morning shift and then I would stream the evening news, and I was like, these guys are like really good. Like, what am I doing here? Like, this is a legitimate city and not that Springfield's not, but you know what I mean? I was just nervous. So yeah, that summer was very stressful in terms of like, okay, am I ready for this big jump? But you know what? The people here are like people will just, you'll be pumping your gas at the gas station. They'll be like, Emily, how are you? And you're like, oh, you like, they act like they know you and they make you feel like you're friends with them. So that certainly helped with the transition too.
Well, for me, myself, I've lived in Rhode Island my whole life. So, of course, parents watching the news all the time, more of my mother than my father does. But, NBC 10, WPR 12, all these other stations, they're all, they've been with us. And it's not like an LA or a Austin, Texas now, or a New York City where you're running into all these big people, these celebrity type of people. So when you see these newscasters, these journalists in person, it's like, oh my gosh, there they are.
They really do grocery shop.
Yes, they really do that. They really go out and about. They really go out to sporting events and stuff. I want to mention this, and Ferris Bueller had a quote he said in this movie: life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. And you've been at NBC 10 for almost 10 years now. What does that mean, not only from your job and performance level as a journalist, but also the station's belief in you to be able to be here as long as you have, and especially field where it's so turnover heavy.
Yeah, I mean, they are good. I mean, I think it's clear when you see how many people at the station have been here for, decades, literally decades. They are very good about supporting their talent here. Like, if you make it clear that you are committed to the station, they will bring that commitment back to you. Like, there's no undercutting people, like, there I would never try to push Patrice from her job. They would never try to push
Sure.
Patrice from her. They're very, they make it clear these people have put in their time. They are staying where they are. So you don't feel like people are like nipping at your heels either. And so it's, there's a safety almost in a sense with working here, that, you feel like you can kind of trust them to have your back in a sense.
Sure. Well, and that's always comfortable. And it's always from a viewer perspective, it's always nice to see, and don't get me wrong, of course, seeing new faces is always great as well. Change is always good to an extent. But when you see a station like an NBC 10, and other stations as well have this as well, but NBC 10, you have so many people who have been there for so long. So you create a trust and a respect and appreciation for those people because you know that they're doing their best job that they can. Of course, you're not going to be leaving anytime soon. You still have a lot of gas left in the tank to continue to push out good stories. But for you, when that lavalier mic gets put down and the lights turn off, what do you hope the professional journalism legacy is of yourself when that time comes?
Oh, geez. This is a deep question, Nolan. I just hope that people feel and know that I'm being authentic with them. Um, I take my job seriously. Because I know that like a lot of people rely on us. That was made. We started this talking about the pandemic, and people truly did rely on the news when the pandemic, like that. It became abundantly clear how vital a community resource the news was at that point. So I just hope that people know that. And it's not just me. I mean, like, I have to give all the credit in the world to Patrice. Like, she's been here for I don't even know how many years, decades. And she comes in and she pours over her script. She's sitting there listening to the scanner. Like, she puts her heart and soul into this. And, she's Patrice Wood. She could be so checked out. You know what I'm saying? Like, she could just come in and read these scripts with her eyes closed in her sleep. But she genuinely cares about what's happening. She genuinely cares about informing the viewers. So when you work like with people like that, I think that kind of professionalism and it gets passed on to the people around you. So for me, from my point of view, I hope that people know that I'm being authentic when I'm reporting the news, and I'm not just putting on a show because it's fun. Although it is fun sometimes.
Well,
I mean, Dan and Mark are very fun to work with.
Oh, yeah. Well, you want to make sure it's fun because in a world like yours that you're a part of, it can get boring. I'm sure it can get strenuous and sketchy, but also nerve-wracking. So, of course, you wanted to make it a nice environment. So circulating yourself with all those wonderful people is a positive. Before we can end here today with a little game I want to say, Emily, thank you so much for doing this and being here with me for the time you have. As I said again, I know you're busy. I appreciate the time you took aside to do this. I appreciate your patience as my green screen behind me is fluttering out like it's about to pass out on life support.
It was only fluttering in one corner.
Oh, yeah. So and it makes it well because of course it's a huge, successful, popular show with millions of viewers. So that's definitely gonna help down the road when I put this out there next week. I want to end on a little game called the One Word Challenge. So what it entails with this is that I'll throw out a few names of people, places, or things that have some connection to you, and you have to do your best to say either a word or two or a sentence that best comes to mind when you hear it. So if you're ready, I'll begin.
Okay.
First one, New Jersey.
Home.
Rhode Island.
Second home.
Hard work.
Necessary.
Success.
Lucky.
NBC 10.
Legacy.
Frank Coletta.
Salute.
And last but certainly never least in this cosmic universe we all called Earth, Emily Volz.
Me. Me. I'll leave it at that.
There you go. That's a different answer, but it's one that makes it just as entertaining. Well, ma'am, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Again, I know I've said it a few times, but it truly means a lot for you to share your stories and your take on your field that you've been able to do for so long.
Oh, thank you. This was fun, and it went by super quick. So I had an awesome time. Thank you so
Well,
much.
no problem. Obviously, in the day and age like this where social media is rampant and running wild, and that's everything to do with the profession, particularly with yourself, since news is now 24/7. Where can we find you social media wise?
Oh gosh, okay. I think my Twitter handle or my X handle is Emily Volz News. My Facebook professional page should also be Emily Volz News, maybe. And my Instagram is Emily_Volz.
Well, you heard the lady. Follow her, all that fun jazz. You stay today. Even if you're not from Southern New England, you're gonna want to tune in because this is the best place to be. If you enjoy this episode, because who the hell when it and down the line when it becomes a huge successful show as it already is, you want to comment, subscribe, share all that fun jazz. So boost the algorithm. Follow on social media, Nolan Car9, Twitter and Instagram, Nolan Car9 Show. In the words of Johnny Carson, the dean of talk shows, certainly like this one, I bid you all a heartfelt good night. Till next time we speak again.